The most important thing to remember when we talk about expanding our experience of orgasm or changing our experience of orgasm is that this is about expansion, not contraction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Things That Come Between Us. I am your host, Charu Morgan, and I've been working with couples and individuals for almost 20 years, helping them to feel more connected to themselves, their bodies, their sexuality, and their partners. And I'm excited to continue to share this work in this new format of a podcast. And on this podcast, we're talking about the things that come between us and the people that we desire to connect with. And if you're inspired to learn more about my work, you can go to charumorgan.com, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. So today we're going to be talking about one of my very favorite topics, and the way I refer to it is the spectrum of orgasm. And what I'm really speaking about when I speak of this spectrum is how essentially I feel like in our culture, in the way that we understand sexuality within our culture, we tend to think about orgasm in this one way. When we say like, did you have an orgasm? Did you come? Did I come? We're talking about this one very particular experience. And I've mentioned this on past episodes. Oftentimes that experience includes a buildup of energy, a very specific feeling in the genitals, a feeling that has a strong like craving toward something. And when we have a certain sensation, oftentimes that's created by friction, that sensation invites more of that feeling. So that intensity in the genitals grows, and we kind of climb this growth as we give that particular form of, like I said, often, not always, but often friction. And that feeling grows and it grows and it grows and it grows until it reaches a peak of intensity. And it kind of tips over an edge. We get a big, beautiful, rich, explosive feeling, hopefully through our whole bodies, maybe primarily through our genitals. If we're in a male body, we've ejaculated. And then oftentimes there's a kind of falling off where there's a nice softening, a relaxation after. And that tends to be, if I say like, did you have an orgasm? Likely, unless you've studied things on the spectrum, you are probably thinking, oh, that's what she's talking about, or that's what my lover's talking about. And so my perspective is a little bit different in that I see that as one way to experience orgasm. And this is where I'm going to be really, really clear that I love that way of having an orgasm. And in for this context, when we begin to expand out and see this larger spectrum, I'm going to refer to this one kind of orgasm as a peak orgasm or a peak orgasmic experience. And that's just for reference. That's just for us to note. When I say peak orgasm, that's the kind of orgasm I'm talking about, probably what you have already defined as orgasm. And when I think it's really, really important, and I feel this way about every single thing I talk about, that number one, you can't possibly receive everything and all the nuance in a podcast. It's very challenging for me to accept this because I always want to make sure like the widest view is given, but I'm speaking to you for 30 minutes, sometimes 45, maybe an hour, and it's impossible to give a full breadth and spectrum even within that, which is much wonderfully longer than a social media post. So I really appreciate it for that. And even in this long form, it can be hard to convey all of the subtlety. And something that I've seen in this world of where, obviously I've been in many spaces where we're studying about and we're opening to this possibility that there may be many different ways to experience orgasm in our bodies. And oftentimes what can happen is that there can be a judgment of, oh, the peak orgasmic experience is not as good or not right in some way or somehow less than, and these other experiences are better than. And I want to very clearly convey that if you've been eating one meal for your whole life and you love it and it's a delicious meal, that I just am offering more things on the menu so you get to choose. And this one meal that you love is still on the menu, and it is as valid a choice as anything else that we put on this new menu. So I hope that that makes sense and that you're able to hold that and really remember that, oh, okay, that one's still on the menu. So, and I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One, because we never want to feel like we're losing something, and you're not. And we never want to put things on like a comparison scale. It's just not helpful if we're growing. I guess there's a moment where a comparison scale would be valid. But in this context, when we're growing, when we're wanting to expand, any time we start to like put labels on things like this is better and that's worse, then it is so sneaky how we even start to create some kind of inner forms of control, which just don't really help intimacy. And this is my bottom line. My bottom line is, if you are showing up for yourself in your sexual experiences with an intimacy with yourself, with an intimacy with your partner, that is the ultimate goal, if there was a goal. And if anything that you learn somehow takes away from that intimacy instead of enhancing it, it's, again, here we go with scales. But for me, for my purpose, I'm most interested in the intimacy, in the connection. And that doesn't always have to be the case for you. That's just always where I'm pointing toward. So if you hear something or if you learn something from me and you bring it into the bedroom with you and you discover that it's actually creating distance from intimacy instead of inviting more intimacy in, that would be not the direction that my intention was to point you in. And even there, we could say there are certain moments in which it's appropriate to not allow for yourself to be totally open when you're being sexual with someone, and sometimes it's appropriate to explore that opening. For my intention, I'm always pointing toward what's going to invite that opening, because honestly, my view is that the more connection, the more love flowing, the more intimacy, the more fullness, the more alive you're going to be. And that's and the more deeply nourished by your experiences in sex, in relationship. So that's the direction that I'm pointing in. And even that is a bias. Even as I'm sharing with you, like, please don't bring your bias in. Even that view is a bias, but now you know, so you get a choice to get on board with my bias if you're exploring with me and see if that's resonant for you. And if it isn't, great. Remember, you always have your smorgasbord, and I celebrate that. I celebrate the smorgasbord. So what is this spectrum of orgasm? I find it helpful and interesting to consider it like a multi-textured rainbow, where if you've ever seen like a painting of a rainbow where every color has multiple different shades of that color, so you're looking at maybe 100 different colors made out of, each, like there's 4 different shades of red and there's 5 different shades of orange and that kind of thing. So it's this really wide, beautiful spectrum. And in many ways, it's not a line. Maybe you think of all those colors like lined up and bleeding into each other. I don't quite know if I'm going to be able to articulate this properly, but it's actually almost like a circle. Like everything actually feeds into each other, and one thing isn't just one thing on its own. They're all combined. But for the sake of pointing towards something, I'm going to speak about this spectrum. And when I do, we're going to think about it in color. And the other thing that's really important to understand about color is that sometimes colors can be assigned to certain feelings. And when I assign a color to if I refer to a way of having an orgasm, experiencing an orgasm, and I assign it to a color, I want you to know that I don't actually think that it is energetically related to that color. It's just a coincidence because I'm using it as a tool and a metaphor to speak about it. So, when I'm speaking to you about what's possible on this spectrum, or this new smorgasbord of flavors and textures and tastes in your experience of orgasm, I like to think about the peak orgasmic experience. It tends to be, not that we've all had an experience of, because many of us haven't, but it tends to be the one that we think of, tends to be the way we've currently defined it in our culture. And let's just put that in the spot of red on this one side of the rainbow. And then way over on the other side of the rainbow, we're going to go to a shade of like, maybe it even fades into almost into like, I don't know, white. Let's say on that end of the spectrum, it's like beyond color. And on that side, stay with me here because there's a lot happening in the middle. But almost in order to describe the middle, I feel like I need to share what are on either side. I think that gives some context for where the middle is. So on this other far end, in which I also think they could be a circle and almost touching each other, on this other far end is this experience that I would say is almost more like an orgasmic state. And maybe you've even had an experience of this, but you didn't have a name for it. And maybe you just recognized that it felt really sweet and you noted that, but maybe it didn't have the definition of orgasm for you. And that's totally fine. It doesn't have to have any definition at all. In this space, it's extremely quiet. I sometimes think about it as if an orgasm, like the big explosive orgasm, has that kind of explosion feeling. It's like sitting in the center of that explosion, like the quiet center, where there's an awareness of this incredible vibration and movement around your body. And if you're with a lover, with your lover, and yet it's incredibly quiet, almost like the deafening quiet of a forest. It has a richness. The whole body will feel both lit up and also completely quiet at the same time, if that makes any sense. Every sensation, if your lover is touching you at all, maybe they're touching your hand, every sensation almost unfolds and makes that silence, that like silent vibrancy, feel even richer. It's very difficult to describe like a state, right? And I'm just going to give some examples in case these give some context, and it's not the same for everyone. If you've ever felt in a dream like you're flying, it might have a little bit of that texture. Even if you felt in a dream maybe like you're falling, but it's not scary, but there's just this, it's just something is opening out. That's another way that you may have had a flavor of this. And this form of orgasm, or this orgasmic experience, we can reach this through deeper connections with our own body, through simple movements we might do with our body, through ways we may touch our own bodies. And absolutely, we may experience it in lovemaking through the way that our lover touches and feels us. And in certain special, magical, undefined moments, we may go there with our lover, which is just so precious and so special and one of the great gifts of the universe, I feel. And we're going to talk about more like what is the journey to reach some of these different destinations in orgasm land on this spectrum. So on the one side, we have this like climbing up a ladder and then exploding like a firework and then, relaxing downward. And then on the other side, we have this just rich, silent, vibrating unfolding. And the other thing to note about, at least in my experience of that form of orgasm, is that it doesn't even necessarily have a beginning and end. Whereas when we're on that one side of the spectrum, that more peak orgasm side of the spectrum, it's very much like, I'm gonna have it, I'm gonna have it, I'm gonna have it, I'm gonna have it, I'm gonna have it. Oh, I'm having it. It's a few moments, maybe a little bit longer, and then it's over. It has like a very clear arc. With this more orgasmic state, it could last for hours. It doesn't necessarily have a beginning and an end. It might fade and move into some other textures, and then you might slip back into it. But there's no climb. It's a best word in a world where there are no words. It's a widening and a softening. And this is another thing to note, that when we're heading toward the peak orgasm experience, for many of us, not all, we're all so different, but certain themes that tend to be the same when we're in this climbing the ladder of orgasm is that we tend to need to tense our bodies. And one of the really interesting and kind of energetically intelligent things that we're doing when we tense our bodies in order to have a peak orgasm experience is that we are condensing the energy in the genitals. So if you are someone who tightens the muscles in your legs, maybe, or maybe you hold your breath, what those we're doing is very intelligently, we're using those as tools in order to condense the energy so that the energy is focused in the genitals, and so that we can climb that ladder. And climbing that ladder meaning building that energy in the genitals so it can reach a fullness where it has that fireworks-like explosion. When we're on the opposite end of the spectrum, in this, what I'm calling orgasmic state, this state often arises from complete relaxation. There may be, likely will be sexual, sensual connection, and absolutely this can happen while engaged in lovemaking, and I certainly hope that for you it does. It's absolutely precious and magical. And the important thing to note about this experience is that it is a rising that moves from softening. It may not even be a rising, it's more of an opening out. Like if you can think of a really still lake, and if you touch your finger into the still lake, the ripples move out. It's that kind of vibrational opening. It's like something from the softening opens out and ripples outward. And it's incredibly sweet and incredibly magical. And so then if we come back to the spectrum and we think about how we have on this one side this peak experience, and on this other side this incredibly still experience, then what's in the middle? What's all of this territory in the middle that we get to explore? And I think something that's important to note about all this spectrum in the middle is that I will share a few of the experiences that I've had, a few of the experiences my clients have shared that they've had when they've taken some practices I've given them and brought them home and explored them in their own bodies or with a partner. And because everyone's body is unique, because you are a unique human being, your experience, when you start to open and sensitize your body, you're going to be shown experiences that maybe I haven't experienced, that maybe no one I've taught yet has experienced, because it's about the alchemy of your body meeting with some of the different practices we do for you to really meet yourself, start to show you new things, just like you and how you experience yourself will be different with any partner you choose, and how you experience your sexual experience will be different. Each, the alchemy of the practices with your body is unique to you. So there are common experiences for sure. And I'm also so excited and delighted to see new experiences, and I'm discovering new things every day, and it's so exciting. That's the other thing I love about some of the practices I share, that as the body begins to open and sensitize and just be available for these new pathways to develop, then it's constantly changing, shaping, growing, moving, new things. And it's just such a delight. And this is what I love to do, is like open the doorway for your body to discover what's there for you. What is your body? What's the like special pocket that your body's going to be able to open that maybe like no one has yet penetrated in this life or discovered? So some things that I personally experience and have seen experienced on the spectrum are things like, that have been shared to me that my clients have experienced on the spectrum, are experiences of where there may be, as the body grows in sensitivity, there may be new parts of the body that wake up to sensation, so that when they're touched in a certain way, almost like champagne bubbles, like a ripple of aliveness will rush through the body. And that might originate in the genitals, and it might not. It might originate, from the palm of your hand. It might originate from somebody touching your cheek softly. It might originate from somebody running their fingers down your spine or up your spine, or gently running their fingers on your scalp through your hair. I don't know what's gonna create this opening for you. And this particular opening that I'm speaking about, it might, like, your body may even roll, almost like something that tends to sometimes happen for some of us in that peak orgasm experience, where, sometimes we have that bucking and like the heart pushes open outward, maybe the chin flies back, and there's just this kind of explosion of opening. So that doesn't happen for everyone, but some people, you feel maybe a really fast version of that ripple. This one might be a little bit slower. Again, it's like it bubbles, and it kind of, the way it feels in my body is like a little bring, and it just kind of like rolls through, and my body will, oftentimes there'll be a sound that will come with it, and there'll just be this little rolling movement through my spine. And the sensation is really rich and delightful. And oftentimes in my body will also include a pulsing in the genitals, just like there might be in a peak orgasm experience. And so that's another one. I don't have a name for that, but that's another, something a stop that you might find on this spectrum of orgasm as your body sensitizes. There may be pockets, if we move back toward the end of the spectrum, where we have that ladder climbing, high intensity, explosive orgasm, somewhere maybe in the oranges, like pretty close to that. We might have a sensation where certain areas of the body will be stimulated. Sometimes it might be genital, and sometimes it may not be, but I'll speak to this as in a genital stimulation context right now, where maybe if you have a female body, it might be through stimulation of the clitoris that you move toward that particular kind of peak orgasm. And maybe there's some stimulation internally, whether that's on the urethral sponge, which is sometimes also referred to as the G-spot, on the front wall of a vagina. Whether the stimulation is there, or for different people, it can happen in different places. And like I said, this is actually something that could happen really anywhere on the body, but specifically just to speak about genitally, there's also this flavor of an orgasmic experience or orgasmic sensation where, rather than climbing up a ladder and getting to a place where there's an explosion, that we have to kind of work toward that place that I'm gonna come feeling, we can also have this sensation where almost it sneaks up on us. It takes us by surprise, where there's a feeling of maybe something has been stimulated, something has been touched, and maybe there is even a little bit of movement, but there isn't that I need to tense everything to work towards this, there's just a sudden pop or a sudden, this could be so different for anybody, but it could be a pop, it could feel like an explosion, it could feel like almost not in a heat way, but I think the way that I can describe this to kind of create an image is like almost like a fireball, like something that starts small but then very quickly, like just whoosh, lights up the whole body, which is super fun. I don't think that it's about lighting up every single possibility on the spectrum, because again, there's so many possibilities that I haven't even discovered yet, because some of them are going to be for you to discover. But I think the thing that I want you to leave this episode with is the way the possibilities begin to expand. So we start to feel like, I think also in the pocket of what I was talking about, that little kind of champagne bubble orgasm, there can also be this experience of what I sometimes refer to as this rolling orgasm, where something in the body has been activated. It doesn't necessarily need to be from the genitals. Sometimes maybe it might be activated from just you're kissing your lover and your tongue touches their tongue, and just these two energy points meeting. There can create not only that little roll of that little like champagne bubbles roll, but also this consistent, again, where maybe there's not necessarily a beginning and an end, but the sensation of like a rolling, unfolding that's moving in multiple waves, where it's not just one. Sometimes that little more champagne bubble one will come and it'll just be this one little brink, and then and more of a rolling orgasm, which might be like a little more in the direction of the orgasmic state, in that like kind of as the colors go into purple and then maybe into white, there's this rolling sensation where it's just like and then that rolls through, and then and that rolls through. I'm literally making a sound to try to indicate the shape of the movement of the energy, not because that's the sound you're going to make when it happens. Hopefully your sounds will be infused with genuine pleasure, rather than this kind of rote thing that I'm giving, but it's this where it just kind of continues to roll. So I think you can get this visualization of the potential. What if we took off our blinders? Like, if you've ever seen a horse where sometimes in order to keep them from being distracted, they'll have little pieces of leather like attached to the side of their eyes so they won't look to the sides and they'll stay looking straight ahead. If we can think about that, we've been looking straight ahead and defining orgasm as this one thing, this peak orgasmic experience. And what I'm hoping for is that this episode kind of takes off those blinders and we open up this possibility that so many different things can happen under the umbrella of orgasm or an orgasmic experience. Well, why would we want that? Why wouldn't we? I mean, expanding pleasure, tasting all the flavors, consistently, if we're in long-term relationship, consistently creating bonding with our partner in new ways as our body softens and opens to pleasure, allowing ourselves to be really deeply nourished by our sexual experiences. Sometimes, and I talk about this, I think it was like in episode 2 maybe, but sometimes when we are working and trying so hard to have our peak orgasmic experience, we can actually feel so focused on creating that experience that we're so hungry for, or even our lover can be so focused on it, that we might miss some of the intimacy, some of the nourishment, and remember what I said in the beginning of the episode of there is no one is better than the other. We're just talking about some of the benefits of investing in expanding and being open. Something that I experimented with so many years ago, but it was so rich for my body, was I had primarily been experiencing orgasms from my clitoris on this climbing the ladder, this peak orgasmic way of experiencing. And as I started to study and work with the body in new ways, I just had this curiosity. I just had this interest of what would lovemaking be like? What would open for me if I didn't focus on that? Just a curiosity, not a judgment. Please, if you learn anything from me, please don't walk away from this with a judgment. And I said to my partner at the time, what happens if we don't stimulate my clitoris and attempt to get me to a peak orgasm? I'd like to experiment with that. I'd like to experiment with that for the next, I think we did a year of something like that, informal year. And so within that time, without pointing toward that one thing that I knew I would get that certain result for, and parallel to what was happening in the bedroom, both my partner and I were working on, what do I need to feel more connected to myself? How do I continue to invest in opening and sensitizing my body so I can feel what makes me feel alive, so I can open up new pathways of vitality and aliveness? And this is a whole body thing. This is not necessarily anything that looks sexual. And then as I'm doing that, and I'm with my partner and we're making love and we're not focusing on the one thing we know is going to give me a peak orgasmic experience, well, what happens now? And it was such a incredible journey of evolution and discovery of how I could keep my body maybe more relaxed and what that relaxation gave me. How that relaxation and softening actually sometimes challenged me. And I noticed that in some ways, not all the time, but sometimes I had been hiding behind trying to have an orgasm because it was less intimate to be focused on making sure I had that one kind of pleasure for me in this context. It was less intimate than what would happen when I would soften and relax my body and allow for whatever sensation was there. And that was an important experiment for me. It may not be the right experiment for you. So this is also important to note, right? Not everything is right for everyone. For me, that experiment was about, if I had that favorite meal, if we were talking about it in the beginning as, we had that favorite meal that we always went back to, and I just absolutely loved that meal. And for me, it was interesting for me to set it aside to see and discover what were other tastes and flavors and things that my body was capable of or interested in that I had never had the space to follow before because I was so busy leaning toward that one meal that I prefer. And now I have all the choices, and still many times I delight in choosing that one favorite meal, that peak orgasmic experience, and many times I choose the other things on the smorgasbord. The most important thing to remember when we talk about expanding our experience of orgasm or changing our experience of orgasm is that this is about expansion, not contraction. So we're always looking at keeping that suppleness, and this is true in all aspects of relationship, is this suppleness around, maybe there's an interest and excitement in discovering new experience of orgasm. And again, just it's a very human thing where we might then try to negate the experience we're having. Please, please don't do this. Keep this suppleness, keep this interest and acceptance and delight in the ways your body already knows pleasure. And then let's see what happens as right now maybe your mind has been expanded to know that there are new things on the spectrum. And then who knows what can happen now that you know that. Are you interested in leaning in? Are you interested in learning more about how your body can sensitize to become available to these new ways of experiencing pleasure? Because that's really the process. The process is really shifting some of the thickening that may have to do with different traumas or challenges from our past. It may have to do with just physical body tension. It may have to do with ways we think we're supposed to behave and how that's created certain hardenings around aspects of our relationship to parts of our body, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to look, what we're supposed to do, being, quote unquote good. All of these things like shape the way we relate to our bodies and shape the way our bodies hold tension and move in the world. And so this process is, how do we soften? How do we start to release some of that tension? How do we start to develop new pathways to creating relationships with our body? And the more we have this new relationship with our body, the more available we are for new things to happen. That's really it. I mean, it sounds simple. Some of it is, and some of it is challenging, like simple but challenging. And something that maybe I should have said earlier in the episode, but that's really important to note is that this is not, let me say it differently, this is for everyone. Whatever sex you are, this capacity for expanding your experience of orgasm is possible in any and every body if it's something that's of interest to you. So this is not limited to a female body or a non-binary body or a male body. This is across the spectrum possible. And I want to share that in these words specifically because sometimes it has, come into the popular culture like, oh, women can, have different multiple orgasms, but men can't. That is simply not true. I have guided and supported many different people in all different bodies in experiencing fully ecstatic states without any genital stimulation or anything that even looked sexual, but just being able to activate and soften into experiences of deep pleasure and richness in all bodies. So that's really important. There were a couple of examples, and me being a woman, sharing my personal experiences, and there are a couple of examples where I spoke about different things that might work for a woman's body. There are different things that might work with the different bodies and the different genitals, and all of these sort of altered states, which I kind of consider orgasm as like an altered state of consciousness. All of these different states are available no matter what body you are in. And the difference in how we relate to our experience of these states is that, you are a unique snowflake thing of your personal life experiences, the tension that you hold in your body, the things that you've been through, the ideas of who you're supposed to be. These are all things that are part of your journey of how your body's going to interact with your sexual experience, how your body's going to interact with your relationship to yourself. And none of this is a problem. All of it is an interesting and exciting adventure. What is your body capable of that you may have not discovered yet? I mean, really, I think it's so exciting and magnificent that there's all of this possibility. And I love to be standing here on this side of having done so much discovery myself and invested more time and energy in this particular exploration than most people will have to invest in it. So from this side, I can, wave to you and say, hey, this is possible. And, it's going to be a few simple things. And depending on the context of your life, it's may take a short time, it may take a longer amount of time, but look at what's available here. There's so much blessing. And the more that this is opening in your own body, the more that this is opening between you and your partner, if you have one, the more nurtured and nourished your body will be, your partnership will be, honestly, your life will be, right? How can we not have just more of that vitality and nourishment and vibrancy for life and love when we are being nourished by different pleasure states. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this, please remember to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Give us 5 stars. Really, really, it means so much. Write us a review, share an episode with a friend. It really, really helps to continue to get this to more people. And I value it so much and appreciate your care and support. And if you're interested in booking a session with me, joining a future retreat, you can find me directly on charumorgan.com, and we are putting a link in the show notes for that. Thank you again so much for being here, and I hope you will listen again next week.